Hey everyone, welcome to a special installment of Harry Potter Theory. Today we're going to be taking a look back at 2024 and putting the spotlight on my 10 favourite Harry Potter theories of the year. Anyway, I won't dawdle any longer, let's get into it. Tom Marvolo Riddle was born at Wool's Orphanage on New Year's Eve 1926 to Merripy Gaunt, a pure-blood witch and the daughter of Marvolo Gaunt. Tragically, Merripy died shortly after Riddle was born, the result of a broken heart. Abandoned by the man that she loved and suffering complications from childbirth, paired with starvation and or hypothermia, Merripy no longer had any desire to live, and made no attempts to utilize magic to save her own life. Merripy refused to raise her wand even to save her own life. She wouldn't even stay alive for her son. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "Could you possibly be feeling sorry for Lord Voldemort?" "No," said Harry quickly. "But she had a choice, didn't she? Not like my mother." "Your mother had a choice too," said Dumbledore gently. "Yes, Merripy Riddle chose death in spite of a son who needed her, but do not judge her too harshly, Harry. She was greatly weakened by long suffering, and she never had your mother's courage." Merripy's death meant that she was never there for Tom, and because of this he grew up without any concept or notion of love, something that many consider to be a lasting effect of the love potion that Merripy had used on Tom's father, Tom Riddle Sr. And it's Voldemort's inability to feel love that is widely perceived to have catalyzed his path of villainy. Many believe that, thanks to his mother and father, Voldemort was, in a way, destined for evil. I've seen it posted and stated just about everywhere that Voldemort is fundamentally incapable of feeling love. But in my opinion, this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the story. The most common interpretation is that because he was born under a love potion, there exists no possibility for him to feel love or similar emotions. But this has actually been cleared up by J.K. Rowling in an interview. How much does the fact that Voldemort was conceived under a love potion have to do with his inability to understand love? Is it more symbolic? It was a symbolic way of showing that he came from a loveless union, but of course everything would have changed if Merripy had survived and raised him herself and loved him. In just a few sentences here, J.K. Rowling opens up the possibility of Voldemort loving something. Someone. She said it herself. If Merripy had survived and been there to raise him, then there's a very good chance that he could have loved. This means that he was never quite as emotionally incapable as other canon suggests. So my question is, if the transformation of Tom Riddle into Voldemort could have been avoided by some love and care, then what on earth happened to him at the orphanage? I suppose it's possible that he simply needed the love and care of his mother, but weren't the caregivers at the orphanage good to Tom? Or was it actually Tom's upbringing that was directly responsible for creating the monster that tore apart the wizarding world? In the heart of bustling London, tucked away in a forgotten corner, stood Wool's Orphanage, a desolate refuge where Tom Riddle spent the first 11.5 years of his life. The orphanage itself was described as a grim, square building surrounded by high railings, with stone stairs and a bare courtyard. Within the orphanage, Tom Riddle had a single room that contained an iron bedstead, an old wardrobe, and a hard wooden chair. The room's only decoration came from 7 stones sitting on a windowsill and a photo of a cliff on the wall. Inside, the air hung heavy with a sense of despair, as if the walls themselves wept silently for the unfortunate souls that called this place home. Faded, threadbare curtains grimaced in the feeble light that filtered through smudged windows, casting a pallid and sorrowful hue over the sparse and worn-out furnishings. The creaking floorboards echoed with muffled sighs of longing, and each room held rows of narrow, discomforting beds, decorated only by thin blankets that hardly provided respite from the chill that seeped through the cracked walls. The truth is, Tom Riddle couldn't have been in an orphanage during a worse time period. The orphanage system in the UK only really began to take off in the 19th century, which meant that it was still very much in its infancy. Furthermore, 1926, the year Voldemort was born, was the very same year that the Child Adoption Act was passed in the UK, which finally made child adoption legal. During Tom Riddle's time there, the circumstances were nothing short of terrible. The aftermath of the First World War had left a surplus of war orphans, combined with programs aiming to remove street children from the grim city streets. This sudden influx of children easily overwhelmed the existing system, resulting in overcrowded facilities and a severe lack of resources. Many orphanages were unable to cope with the overwhelming demand and were forced to shut down or merge with others. The dire conditions led to scarce provisions, with it not being uncommon for multiple children to share a bed or sleep on the floor. Shoes were considered a luxury, and most orphans were lucky to have only 1 or 2 sets of clothes, one for winter and one for summer. Lack of nutritious food was a constant struggle, and orphans often subsisted on the same meagre and watered-down soup or porridge for weeks on end. Overworked caretakers, who were stretched thin and in many cases were neglectful or even abusive, added to the challenging atmosphere. To make matters worse, during this time many children as young as 12 were forced into labour, working grueling hours in docks and factories. With hygiene conditions deteriorating, diseases like diphtheria, cholera and measles flourished, leaving malnourished children with weakened immune systems vulnerable to these illnesses. And as if the conditions were not already dire enough, in 1931 the Great Depression struck the United Kingdom, coinciding with Tom being just 5 years old. Orphanages lost a significant portion of their funding, exacerbating the scarcity of food and resources. The reality of death surrounded the young children, with illness and disease claiming the lives of those all around them, something that I feel further ingrained Tom's fear and obsession with mortality. In this grim and despairing environment, Tom Riddle was forced to endure, navigating a world where hope was a scarce commodity and the spectre of death loomed ever closer. Tom experienced firsthand the fragility of life. The constant presence of death, whether through diseases, malnourishment, or the loss of peers, reinforced his awareness of mortality from an early age. This heightened awareness of death and the transience of life left a lasting impact on Tom's psyche. By 1938, when Dumbledore first visited Tom, things had improved a little. Just 2 years prior, the Departmental Committee on Adoption Agencies had been appointed, and Dumbledore's description of the orphanage as shabby but spotlessly clean is a good indicator that things were moving in the right direction. But that doesn't take anything away from the fact that for the majority of his time at the orphanage, Tom Riddle lived in absolute squalor. This brings me to my first point. The environment of Will's orphanage, combined with the harsh economic and social realities that surrounded Tom Riddle, left little room for the growth and development of positive emotional traits, such as love and compassion. The constant struggle for resources, lack of direction, and early exposure to hardship and loss made it impossible for Tom to find the emotional nourishment needed for healthy growth and development. Instead of love and compassion, Tom developed an overwhelming desire for power, control, and recognition. Conceived under a love potion, left behind by his mother, and growing up in this sort of environment meant that Tom Riddle never really had much of a chance. After beginning his studies at Hogwarts in 1938, Tom continually expressed a strong desire to avoid returning to Will's orphanage for the summers, on one occasion even making a special request to the then headmaster, Armando Dippet, to remain in school during the holidays. And how could we blame him? After his very first year at Hogwarts, Tom returned to London during a time of heavy preparation for war. The city was in the process of building air raid shelters and readying anti-air guns and balloons, while the call for military service began. As summer neared its end, Tom discovered that not only he, but also the majority of London's child population, including his fellow orphans, were being evacuated to the countryside. Over 800,000 children had been relocated from the city by early September. On the day Tom left for Hogwarts in September, Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of World War II. The British Army mobilized, and 2 days later, the United Kingdom officially declared war on Germany. And when he returned to London at the end of his second year, he found the city in a state of panic. France had recently fallen, and the Battle of Britain had begun, with German and British fighter planes engaging in aerial combat. Rationing had commenced, air warning drills became a normal part of daily life, and on August 9th, the Birmingham Blitz commenced, which, although not directly affecting London, sent shockwaves throughout the entire United Kingdom. If we fast forward to the summer before his 7th year at Hogwarts, Tom would have bore witness to the first V1 missiles to hit London, which claimed the lives of over 6,000 people in a 12-day period. And though by this time Tom had already heavily descended into darkness, The catastrophic bombing of London by the Germans would have only further catalyzed Tom's jaded perspective on the world, and perhaps served as motivation for some of his more twisted world philosophies, such as the idea that there is no good or evil, only power, and those too weak to seek it. In an environment where the primary goal is survival, like the impoverished and desperate conditions faced by Tom, moral and ethical considerations tend to take a back seat. The immediate focus becomes ensuring basic needs like food and water are met, often trumping any concerns for the well-being of others. In situations like this, power becomes a critical factor. Those who possess power have control over resources, which means they have access to more food and essential items. The individuals who lack power or are deemed too weak are left to suffer and potentially starve. This is likely a contributing factor in Voldemort's growing obsession with achieving power. Furthermore, as the city faced relentless bombings and destruction, the constant threat of death pervaded the atmosphere. This only further magnified the fragility and impermanence of life, exacerbating Tom's obsession with his own mortality. The destruction and loss all around him intensified Tom's belief that life was fleeting and fragile. Seeing the consequences of war, the suffering inflicted upon innocent people, and the indiscriminate nature of death strengthened his resolve to transcend mortality. Desperate to assert control in the face of such destruction, he saw power as a means to protect himself from the horrors he witnessed, believing that if he gained enough control and influence, he could avoid the same fate that so many others suffered. Next, I want to touch on something directly tied to the orphanages that I've somehow managed to avoid so far. We've healthily established the social and economic struggles associated with the time period, but I haven't even begun to touch on intrapersonal dynamics within the orphanage. We know that lack of love and care contributed to Voldemort's downfall, but I wonder how that happened. Is it just that he wasn't nurtured, or was he actively mistreated? The 1930s and 40s witnessed the profound societal impact of the looming World War II, which caused immense distress and uncertainty for many individuals, and the caretakers at Tom Riddle's orphanage were no exception to this. As key figures responsible for the children's welfare, they grappled with the pressures and anxieties associated with living through such tumultuous times. And during these periods of great stress and adversity, individuals would often seek solace in unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol. I think that the caretakers at the orphanage, burdened by the weight of wartime stress, may have turned to alcohol as a method of emotional relief and escapism. Mrs. Cole was the Muggle matron of Will's orphanage, and we see evidence of her alcoholism when she is questioned by Dumbledore. Dumbledore did not press her, though Harry could tell that he was interested. She took yet another gulp of gin, and her rosy cheeks grew rosier still. Billy Stubbs' rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it. I don't see how he could have done. But even so, it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it? I shouldn't think so, no, said Dumbledore quietly. But I'm jiggered if I know how he got up there to do it. All I know is he and Billy had argued the day before, and then Mrs. Cole took another swig of gin, slopping a little over her chin this time. And while alcohol can provide temporary respite from negative events, it often exacerbates volatile emotions and impairs judgment. For the caretakers at Tom Riddle's orphanage, the consumption of alcohol as a coping mechanism may have led to heightened frustration and aggression towards the children in their care. Drunken interactions could easily devolve into mistreatment, as their inability to manage stress and emotions spilled over into their caregiving roles. Furthermore, in the 1920s, abuse in orphanages was not particularly uncommon. Through strict disciplinary measures, orphans would be subjected to physical punishment, including beatings, slapping, or other forms of physical violence. And this abuse, inflicted by harsh, authoritarian caretakers, would often result in physical injury or long-term psychological harm. In the case of Voldemort, it was the latter. By the time Dumbledore visited Tom at the orphanage, he was old enough and aware enough to make bad things happen to people. The caretakers and the other children were afraid of him. But Tom had been at the orphanage since he was an infant, which means that he may have been the target of abuse prior to him even being old enough to acknowledge it. He only endured it for as long as he remained out of touch with his magical ability. As an adult, Voldemort's ideology was founded on the notion that wizards were inherently superior to Muggles, and they ought to exercise their power over them, an ideology that was unquestionably shaped by his difficult childhood experiences. Growing up in a war-torn environment at an abusive orphanage, Voldemort didn't exactly see the good side of Muggles, and though he committed an unforgivable number of atrocities later in life, I can't imagine how young Tom Riddle could have ever really stood a chance. First things first, Dumbledore is unquestionably one of the most powerful and intelligent wizards to have ever lived. While at school, Dumbledore's magical abilities consistently turned heads, particularly his skills surrounding charms and transfiguration. He also did exceptionally well on his newts and owls. Griselda Marchbanks, a professor working for the Wizarding Examinations Authority, remarked that Albus was able to do things with a wand that she had never seen before. Remember that. He was remarkably wise, cunning, tactical, and even emotionally intelligent. But while Dumbledore may very well be all of these things, the series often portrayed him to be practically omniscient, so much so that it's even remarked upon by other characters. "You are omniscient as ever, Dumbledore." "Oh no," merely friendly with the local barman. And while this may have been a somewhat playful comment on Dumbledore's behalf, I think that there may actually be some pointers in the story that help to explain Dumbledore's seemingly all-knowing perspective. Dumbledore, throughout the books, just seems to give off an overwhelming feeling that he knows what's going around him at all times. And, as it turns out, there may be a practical explanation for this. Enter Chocolate Frog cards. Chocolate Frog cards were magical trading cards that displayed pictures of famous figures in the wizarding world, and included a little bit of information about them. They could be obtained by purchasing chocolate frogs, which contained a random card inside. The famous cards are first discussed by Ron Weasley on the Hogwarts Express in The Philosopher's Stone. Chocolate frogs have cards inside them, to collect. Famous witches and wizards. I've got about 500, but I haven't got Agrippa or Ptolemy. As for the history of the cards, we don't actually know when they were introduced. However, we do know that they underwent a packaging change in 1926. The theory is this: Dumbledore utilized his portraits on the chocolate frog cards to spy on people, creating the perfect network for espionage. These collectible cards were extremely popular in the wizarding world, and since Dumbledore's card was quite common, it could have served as a potential source of communication. Just as Dumbledore made use of the headmaster portraits in his office at Hogwarts to send messages and observe other locations, it is plausible that he could have employed a similar tactic with his chocolate frog equivalent. This would of course require some magical tampering, but given Dumbledore's ingenuity, it is reasonable to assume that he would have been capable of such manipulation. And who pops up on a chocolate frog card as early as Harry's very first encounter with Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger aboard the Hogwarts Express? Why, Albus Dumbledore, of course. Harry is introduced to Dumbledore somewhat through the chocolate frog card he opens on the train to Hogwarts, but Harry can't quite comprehend why Dumbledore's picture keeps disappearing. To this, Ron explains to Harry that Dumbledore can't be there all the time, and while this comes across as a fairly innocuous, potentially playful comment, maybe he really can't be there all the time, the reason being that he's gone off to spy on someone else. Furthermore, Dumbledore demonstrates other spying techniques in the series, like in the Order of the Phoenix, when he employed the portraits of past Hogwarts headmasters and headmistresses to gather information on the Department of Mysteries. If the chocolate frog cards could indeed be used similarly to the portraits in the Hogwarts headmaster's office, they could serve as an extensive network of spies for Dumbledore throughout the wizarding world. Since most individuals in possession of a chocolate frog card would be unsuspecting witches and wizards, it would provide Dumbledore with a means to observe their surroundings and to gain valuable insights. Alright, so that's the theory. Now let's take a look at a few arguments for and against. Titles. In the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore was stripped of many honors the wizarding world had bestowed on him, and one of the first things he was informed of was that he had been removed from the Wizengamot. Upon hearing this news, Dumbledore didn't really seem to care, but one thing he did mention is that he did not want to be removed from the chocolate frog cards. This remark, at face value, seems typical of Dumbledore's humorous nature, but in the face of this theory may now hold deeper meaning. During this period in time, Dumbledore's influence in the wizarding world was waning, and he may have seen his chocolate frog cards as a way of staying connected to current events. For example, imagine if the Minister for Magic kept one of his cards hidden in his desk. Via this card, Dumbledore could have received valuable information on how the government was handling, or not handling, the return of the Dark Lord. Thus, it would make sense that losing his position on the Chocolate Frog cards would be the accolade Dumbledore would want to preserve above all else. They're trying to discredit him. Didn't you see the Daily Prophet last week? They reported that he'd been voted out of the chairmanship of the International Confederation of Wizards because he's getting old and losing his grip. But it's not true. He was voted out by Ministry Wizards after he made a speech announcing Voldemort's return. They've demoted him from Chief Warlock on the Wizengamot. That's the Wizard High Court. And they're talking about taking away his Order of Merlin First Class, too. But Dumbledore says he doesn't care what they do as long as they don't take him off the Chocolate Frog cards. Ron's response. Next, I want to go all the way back to the Philosopher's Stone and Harry's first encounter with Dumbledore's card. The logistics of how Dumbledore would utilize Chocolate Frog cards are rather intricate. The theory suggests that the images on these cards have the ability to move between the various collectibles scattered throughout the wizarding world. Ron's remark to Harry on the Hogwarts Express seems to support this notion. When Dumbledore's image vanished from Harry's card, Ron commented, "Well, you can't expect him to hang around all day, can you?" This implies that there might only be a single, or perhaps a few, miniature Dumbledore figures that can jump from card to card. Furthermore, in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it's revealed that individuals depicted in portraits have the ability to move to other portraits of themselves, regardless of the distance between them. This explains why Harry, Ron, and Hermione took Phineas Nigellus Black's portrait from Grimmauld Place. If such inter-portrait travel was feasible, and if Chocolate Frog cards operated under the same principle, then this theory regarding Harry Potter could indeed be quite plausible. Issues. Alright, so hopefully I've been able to convince you of this theory thus far. Here come some of the holes. First of all, this theory only works on the basis that Chocolate Frog cards work just like magical portraits. I actually happen to have made a video on magical portraits, and during that process I discovered just how intricate these portraits are, particularly Headmaster's portraits. Dumbledore was a particularly gifted wizard, but in some ways the magic required for a secret informant network of Chocolate Frog cards seems out of reach. Next, we have the ethical considerations. There are plenty of theories out there suggesting that Dumbledore was of dubious morality, and the plausibility of this theory may very well depend on your own perspective of Dumbledore. If you subscribe to the idea that Dumbledore was a puppet master who manipulated people, this theory might just work for you. But if you subscribe more to the belief that Dumbledore was very much a reformed and benevolent man, then it may not tick as many boxes. Having a network of Chocolate Frog card informants would be extremely unethical and a massive breach of privacy to, well, anyone that had a card. Then again, the argument could also be made by Dumbledore that it was all for the greater good. We're first introduced to Professor Horace Slughorn in The Half-Blood Prince, just moments prior to Harry beginning his 6th year at Hogwarts. The introduction occurs when Dumbledore and Harry visit the home of Horace Slughorn, and Dumbledore persuades him to return to Hogwarts. Eventually, Dumbledore is able to successfully convince Slughorn to come out of retirement and teach potions. However, had it not been for the presence of Harry, Dumbledore may well have been unsuccessful. You see, Horace Slughorn, talented wizard and respected professor, was a bit of a social climber, and it was the opportunity to associate himself with Harry that lured him back to Hogwarts. Horace, said Dumbledore, relieving Harry of the responsibility to say any of this, likes his comfort. He also likes the company of the famous, the successful, and the powerful. He enjoys the feeling that he influences these people. He has never wanted to occupy the throne himself. He prefers the back seat. More room to spread out, you see. He used to handpick favourites at Hogwarts, sometimes for their ambition or their brains, sometimes for their charm or their talent, and he had an uncanny knack for choosing those who would go on to become outstanding in their various fields. Horace formed a kind of club of his favourites with himself at the centre, making introductions, forging useful contacts between members, and always reaping some kind of benefit in return, whether a free box of his favourite crystallised pineapple, or the chance to recommend the next junior member of the Goblin Liaison Office. Essentially, Horace Slughorn likes to pick favourites from all of his classes. He has a keen eye to identify if someone will go on to achieve greatness in some capacity, and takes great pride in their accomplishments. In the beginning of The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore instructs Harry to try and become chosen by Slughorn. I tell you all this, Dumbledore continued, not to turn you against Horace, or as we must now call him, Professor Slughorn, but to put you on your guard. He will undoubtedly try to collect you, Harry. you would be the jewel of his collection, the boy who lived, or as they call you these days, the chosen one. And after he agrees to return to Hogwarts, we just sort of chalk up this bizarre behaviour to Slughorn being eccentric, not giving it much further thought. For the most part, Slughorn is regarded as charming, jovial, and well-liked among students and staff alike. He had a talent for creating positive and welcoming environments. He was also known for his love of the finer things in life, such as good food and luxurious tastes. What's more, Slughorn was an excellent professor, showing plenty of enthusiasm and providing practical examples to help students understand complex potion-making techniques. And because of all of Slughorn's positive traits, people pretty much took Slughorn at face value. We later find out that Slughorn had some skeletons in his closet, like giving Tom Riddle information on Horcruxes. But after those memories are extracted, he's still not exactly painted as a guilty party. He comes across as a sort of unwilling participant, divulging information on a topic that he couldn't have possibly considered the ramifications of. But here's my hot take. Slughorn's nature was a lot darker than people realize. I think that Slughorn undersold his level of participation when it came to helping Tom Riddle, and I think that he's got some other dirty dark secrets in that opportunistic brain of his. I've got 3 specific examples, theories, so just hear me out. Horcruxes. We all know that Slughorn divulged some information to Tom Riddle on the topic of Horcruxes, information that was pried out of him when he presented his memories in Half-Blood Prince. Well, you split your soul, you see, and hide part of it in an object outside the body. Then, even if one's body is attacked or destroyed, one cannot die, for part of the soul remains earthbound and undamaged. But of course, existence in such a form, few would want it, Tom, very few. Death would be preferable. Slughorn even initially comes across as remorseful, having altered his memories to avoid the shame of being associated with such a conversation. But when the truth came out and it was revealed that Slughorn had indeed given Tom Riddle crucial information on Horcruxes, I still felt a bit skeptical. First of all, why on earth did someone like Slughorn know how to make Horcruxes? The subject of Horcruxes in the wizarding world is not only taboo, but also incredibly uncharted. Most good witches and wizards wouldn't be caught dead learning about a subject like Horcruxes, and seemingly no one else in the series knows anything about them. Yet here we have a good professor of Hogwarts students that knows them inside and out. Secondly, if Slughorn was so ashamed that he felt the need to alter his memories once, why not twice? Just because Dumbledore got what he wanted out of Slughorn's genuine memories, who is to say that those memories weren't altered as well? Perhaps when Slughorn's memories were unveiled, only a glimmer of the truth shone through. Perhaps Slughorn felt that by divulging some information, he could get them off the scent of a much bigger secret. Which brings me to my theory: Slughorn once had ambitions of creating Horcruxes. No, I don't think he made one, and I say that because I don't think there's enough evidence to support something like that. But plans to make one? Absolutely. Now, let me first state that Slughorn's aspirations to create a Horcrux came from a very different train of thought than Voldemort. Slughorn didn't necessarily want immortality or fear death. Instead, Slughorn's desire to create a Horcrux was fueled by his own dark curiosity and obsession, paired with a desire to preserve his knowledge and influence. Slughorn, known for his tendency to collect and value connections with influential individuals, may have wanted to preserve his wealth of knowledge, connections, and influence beyond his mortal life. Creating a Horcrux could have been a means to ensure that his legacy, knowledge, and influence endure. Furthermore, Slughorn has historically shown a fascination with dark magic. It's highly likely that Slughorn, being a seeker of knowledge and power, may have been driven by the dark curiosity to explore and experiment with the creation of a Horcrux. However, I do also anticipate that Slughorn wouldn't have had it in him to mercilessly commit an act of murder. Because of this aspect, Slughorn would ultimately fail. Perhaps at least a part of Slughorn's unusual demeanor can be attributed to the fact that he's harboring secrets. Dark secrets. Which brings me to my next theory. Master Manipulator. Like I mentioned earlier, Slughorn is known for collecting people, inviting them to his slug club, and then showing them off like trophies. His relationships with his prize students are unusual to say the least, viewing them more as objects rather than individuals. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that Slughorn would accept praise for the accomplishments of his students. But what we have to remember is that Slughorn's relationships with his prize students are driven by a combination of self-interest and the desire for validation and recognition. The Slug Club serves as a platform for Slughorn to associate himself with talented and influential individuals, which in turn reinforces his own sense of importance and status within the wizarding world. Slughorn's habit of showing off his prize students can be seen as an extension of his ego and need for admiration. And here's my hot take. Slughorn's seemingly innocent and jovial nature is just a facade, and by acting like this, he's able to manipulate events and people to serve his own hidden agenda. By showing off and praising his students, he comes across as a nice guy. But I think that's all just part of the act. One of Slughorn's skills is his ability to identify and exploit people's desires and insecurities. He knows how to play into their ambitions and craving for recognition, using compliments and praise to win their favor. By recognizing their talents and making them feel special, he gains their trust and loyalty, effectively manipulating them into doing his bidding. And I think that Slughorn deliberately positions himself to befriend and mentor gifted students in order to later exploit them or use them for his advantage. Now you might be thinking, well, that's not exactly new information. We all know Slughorn acts in his own self-interest. But my theory here posits that Slughorn has little genuine regard for his students and that he operates strictly in self-interest. I also believe that he has little moral compass when it comes to which students he is willing to make this connection with. If he thinks they'll do great things, good or bad, he will foster a relationship with the student in order to better position himself for the future. From this perspective, it's highly unlikely that Slughorn felt true remorse for giving Voldemort information on Horcruxes, as Voldemort, to quote Ollivander for a sec here, did great things. Terrible, yes, but great. Today we're going to be discussing a rather dark theory which posits that Wizardkind, that is, all of the witches and wizards in the magical world, are on a path to extinction. But before we get into their possible extinction, let's first take a brief look at their origins. The exact origins of magic are still unclear to this day. No one knows whether the inception of Wizardkind was born from humans, randomly discovering their magical abilities, or if it was created by way of pact, ritual, or potion. Personally, I find the first theory more intriguing, as it aligned with the concept of Muggleborns and how they would first develop their magical abilities. But in essence, what differentiates the humans from the wizards is the development of the magical gene, a way to tap into the magic that already exists within the world. The first magical being didn't appear until 2600 BC, but what's important to note here is that wizards aren't a new species. They're just a subspecies of regular humans. Because of this, they possess many of the same physical characteristics. It also means that if you trace back the origins of wizards, you'll eventually end up looking at the origins of humans as a whole. But besides the obvious one, the magic, Wizardkind are also different from humankind in a few other, subtle, non-visual ways. They are physiologically different to some extent. And one of the largest ways that Wizardkind differs from humankind is, ironically, life expectancy. According to a figure reported by the Ministry of Divine Health, the average wizarding life expectancy was reported at an average of 137 3/4 years old, which means that they live 57% longer than their Muggle counterparts, who cap out at around 79. I suspect that one of the largest reasons for this is a subtle difference in their physiology that renders them less susceptible to common diseases, illnesses, and sicknesses. Witches and wizards also have access to better medicines and medical remedies. This means that, in addition to their already superior physiology, they're more effectively able to treat a wide variety of illnesses, conditions. Wizarding medicine is particularly advanced, and where a human may suffer from a potentially fatal bone break, their wizard counterpart would be able to take advantage of a potion like Skelegrow, which either mends broken bones or regrows them entirely. A broken bone can be fixed in one night, where a human may require a cast along with months of physical therapy. This is just a prime example of how much more advanced wizarding medicine is, and one reason why they may be able to live for so much longer than their human counterparts. But an increased life expectancy obviously doesn't mean much if their species is doomed for extinction, right? Let's get into that. I was on Reddit recently and came across a rather compelling argument for Wizardkind's inevitable extinction, citing a massive school size, diminishing class sizes at Hogwarts, and an overall lack of wizarding presence in the world. despite Wizardkind existing for millennia. The description of Hogwarts in the series depicts it as a large and expansive castle with at least 142 staircases, 5 dungeons, long hallways, multiple towers, and numerous classrooms. However, despite its vast size, Hogwarts seems to have a relatively small student population compared to its capacity. The exact number of students is inconsistent in the books, with estimates ranging from 280 to 900 students. However, even at its highest estimate, the student population would only be a fraction of its potential capacity. And in case things weren't confusing enough, Rowling later clarified in an interview the exact number of students at the school. There are about 1,000 students at Hogwarts. But the main point is this: the student population is still significantly lower than what would be expected for a school of Hogwarts size. Hogwarts Castle is described as having the size and capacity of a decently sized college, with the ability to accommodate thousands of students. However, the actual student population of Hogwarts is significantly smaller, and with just 15 or so teachers and staff responsible for all of the students, it's clear that Hogwarts has nowhere near the number of students that its size would suggest. Hogwarts is probably at 10% capacity at best. So the next question is, why? Why would the founders of Hogwarts have chosen to include a significant amount of unused space in the castle's design? The proposed answer here is that they didn't create unused space, they simply created a castle that would meet the needs of the students at that time. What this would suggest is that the wizarding population as a whole was about 10 times what it is today. And if that's the case, it means that over the course of a millennia, the wizarding population reduced in size by 90%. That sounds like an expiring species, if you ask me. In the Chamber of Secrets, Ron Weasley even says, "If we hadn't intermarried with Muggles, we would have died out." We also know that witches and wizards did not cohabit well with Muggles. The reason behind this is twofold: a long history of prejudice and the need for secrecy to protect the magical community. Throughout history, witches and wizards faced discrimination and persecution from Muggles who feared and misunderstood their magical abilities. This prejudice created a divide between the magical and non-magical communities, leading to a general mistrust and animosity. To combat this persecution, the Statute of Secrecy was implemented in 1692 to safeguard the magical world. This law required witches and wizards to conceal their existence and abilities from Muggles. This was done to prevent widespread panic, exploitation, or attempts to control the magical community by non-magical individuals. But perhaps it was also implemented with another factor in mind: to preserve their species. To make a change of that magnitude, to hide your world completely, witches and wizards must have been in a truly dire situation. This would also explain, to some extent, the level of prejudice towards Muggles that still presides within the wizarding community. From there, things would have become even more difficult, as separating the two worlds and living in secrecy would have posed new challenges. It would have made it more difficult for witches and wizards to socialize, form relationships, and marry Muggles without risking exposure of the magical world. As societal norms changed over time and marrying Muggles became more accepted, the wizarding community likely experienced a decline in population. Factors such as casualties during World War II and conflicts involving dark wizards like Grindelwald and Voldemort contributed to a significant loss of lives within the magical community. The inherent dangers of wizarding life, from misused spells to magical creatures, also pose threats to individual safety. And the increasing presence of Muggleborns and advancements in Muggle technology further threaten the traditional ways of wizarding life, leading to a diminishing emphasis on magical education and exceptionalism. In short, by the time Harry arrived at Hogwarts, Wizardkind were in hot water, despite all of their physiological advantages. And the primary threat here is that the remaining wizards will exist less and less as their own separate entity, slowly merging with the Muggles and using magic progressively less until they are effectively just Muggles. Here are my thoughts. The first thing I thought about when assessing the potential decline in the wizarding population was a quote from the books referring to the Quidditch World Cup. 100,000 witches and wizards were taking their places in the seats, which rose in levels around the long oval field. Everything was suffused with a mysterious golden light, which seemed to come from the stadium itself. How could Wizardkind possibly be going extinct if 100,000 of them can make it to the Wizarding World's premier sporting event? But while 100,000 is certainly no figure to scoff at, the argument here is that Wizardkind's population is in decline, not that there aren't still a lot of them around. The Quidditch World Cup hosts witches and wizards from all across the world, and on a planet with over 7.95 billion people, this figure represents just 0.00125% of the population. The Quidditch World Cup figures certainly suggest that there are a lot of witches and wizards still around, but doesn't necessarily contradict the argument that the population is dwindling. The next possibility is that Hogwarts is an isolated example of the diminishing population. What this means is that, yes, Hogwarts was designed for many more students, and that, yes, the school used to be a lot more full. However, what this would mean is that the current attendance at Hogwarts is simply a reflection of the casualties the Wizarding world faced during the First Wizarding War. Britain was not a good place to be during the rise of Voldemort, and an even worse place to raise a child, so it's entirely possible that large portions of Britain's wizarding population simply fled the country. The issue with this explanation is that by the time Harry arrived at school, there should have been evidence of a baby boom. A baby boom, in the context of war, refers to a significant increase in the birth rate that occurs after a period of conflict, often as a result of soldiers, or in this case witches and wizards, returning home and starting families. Following conflict, there is typically a period of stability and optimism, which leads to a sharp increase in marriages and subsequent births. As Harry's birth almost directly coincided with Voldemort's death and the end of the war, Harry's second and third years at Hogwarts should have been representative of this massive insurgence of new students. My last gripe with the assertion that Wizardkind is going extinct has to do with how witches and wizards came to be in the first place. As I mentioned earlier, Wizardkind is just a subset of humankind with a genetic mutation that allows them to manipulate magic. This means that, for as long as humankind exists, who don't seem to be going anywhere, there will always be the possibility for humans to develop these magical capabilities. Rowling has also expressed that the magical gene is dominant, which would suggest that there is a 50% chance of passing on the magical gene to offspring in the event of a magical individual mating with a non-magical individual. To summarize, I don't think that the wizarding population is going anywhere. Did the wizarding world, particularly Wizarding Britain, suffer great losses at the hands of Voldemort? Certainly. But is their entire species at risk of extinction? Absolutely not. In a world full of magic where seemingly anything is possible, it's always shocking to hear that even witches and wizards are capable of experiencing financial hardship. The advent of magical abilities makes life a lot easier in a lot of ways, but one limitation of note is that gold cannot be multiplied, therefore wealth cannot be created. The result is that even magical families who can do amazing things like fly through the air, summon objects with the flick of their wand, and teleport can find themselves in financial dire straits. Within the novels there are a few examples of fan-favourite witches and wizards exemplifying this, but perhaps the best known example refers to the Weasley family, the 9-person strong wizarding family that embraces Harry with open arms right near the beginning of the first book. There are numerous passages referencing their lack of wealth, and their poverty seems to be pretty consistent throughout the books. In the Chamber of Secrets, Harry ventures into the Weasley family vault for the first time and witnesses firsthand just how dire their financial situation really was. Harry enjoyed the breakneck journey down to the Weasleys' vault, but felt dreadful, far worse than he had in Knockturn Alley when it was opened. There was a very small pile of silver sickles inside, and just one gold galleon. Mrs. Weasley felt right into the corners before sweeping the whole lot into her bag. And what makes their poverty even more evident is the fact that it's constantly contrasted with Harry's massive fortune of generational potion royalties. Right near the beginning of the first book, we're brought to Vault 687 and witness Harry's immense stacks of gold. And when we're first brought to the Weasleys' house, the description provided by the book doesn't exactly paint them as the pinnacle of wealth. It looked as though it had once been a large stone pigpen, but extra rooms had been added here and there until it was several stories high, and so crooked it looked as though it were held up by magic, which Harry reminded himself it probably was. 4 or 5 chimneys were perched on top of the red roof, A lopsided sign stuck in the ground near the entrance read, "The Burrow." Around the front door lay a jumble of rubber boots and a very rusty cauldron. Several fat brown chickens were pecking their way around the yard. But why are they so poor? Does it even make sense? And just how long have the family been poor for? Is this generational poverty? Let's look at the facts. The first argument one might make with regards to the Weasleys' financial status is that they simply had a large number of expenses, and because Arthur was the primary earner for the family, his salary simply didn't go a particularly long way. Arthur Weasley worked for the Ministry of Magic and was head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts department. It was his job to regulate the use of magic on Muggle objects and to prevent bewitched items from falling into Muggle hands. Later on, however, he was promoted to the head of office for the detection and confiscation of counterfeit defensive spells and protective objects department. We aren't actually provided with in-depth information on how much Arthur makes. However, what's particularly unusual about all of this is that Arthur, in both of his roles, is head of a department. Presumably Arthur, in a position of authority at the ministry, should be compensated accordingly, right? One factor here that may have influenced Arthur's salary was his relationship with his boss, Cornelius Fudge. It's well known that Arthur and Cornelius did not get along, and so it is possible Fudge inhibited Arthur's salary and career progression. But salary aside, it's reasonable to assume that the most significant expense for Arthur was undoubtedly his children, and all of the expenses that come with having children. Every single one of the Weasley children attended Hogwarts, and while Hogwarts is affordable in some ways, tuition is free, school supplies and materials are not, especially at scale. Buying wands, books, brooms, and all sorts of other school supplies on top of taxes, bills, insurance, food, clothes, robes, and even fines, Flying Ford Anglia incident, comes at a heavy price. And given that Arthur was the sole provider for the family, I suppose it does make sense that the Weasleys were under some level of financial stress. However, with all of that said, there are a large number of reasons why their financial situation makes little to no sense. First of all, even partway through the books, the Weasley family seem to have developed quite a few healthy income streams, which presumably should have taken some of the stress off of Arthur. Fred and George opened a successful business, Bill worked as a curse breaker, Charlie worked with dragons in Romania, and Percy worked for the ministry. If the Weasleys were truly as skint as we're led to believe, shouldn't the children have shown compassion for their hard-working father and sent home some money? The Weasleys, aside from Percy, were a particularly tight-knit group, and I'm sure they would have done anything to help out their father. Furthermore, each new working professional represents one less expense on Arthur's end, meaning that by the time all of these children were working, Arthur's salary should have been more than enough to support his remaining dependents. The next thing worth considering is that the Weasleys were purebloods. In the Wizarding world, being of pureblood lineage typically suggests a higher likelihood of wealth and prosperity due to their long-standing history within Wizarding society. In most cases, this longevity provides them with ample time to amass wealth and establish influential positions within this society. It gives them a greater opportunity to accumulate resources, property, and magical artifacts, further solidifying their status and financial stability. But in the case of the Weasleys, they don't seem to have anything to show for it. Expanding on the last point further, it's also worth mentioning that Molly Weasley, formerly Molly Pruitt, married into the Weasley clan, effectively combining the Pruitts, another pureblood family, with the Weasleys. And what's particularly important to note here is that Molly should have been the beneficiary of at least some of the family's generational wealth. Lastly, it seems like even after the kids have all graduated from Hogwarts, the Weasley family continue to live in a somewhat impoverished state. It's also mostly suggested that the Weasleys are basically perpetually poor, regardless of their current income levels, expenses. Here's where things get even more interesting. In Hogwarts Legacy, which takes place over 100 years before the Harry Potter story, we're introduced to even more Weasleys, such as Hogwarts student Gareth and Hogwarts professor Matilda. And what do these Weasleys have in common with the Weasleys of present day? Why, they're also broke, of course. In the game, Gareth Weasley describes his family as being large and poor. He then goes on to state that even though his aunt is a professor at Hogwarts, it has no real impact on the family's financial situation. Here's the theory. The Weasleys have been cursed. Specifically, I think it's a blood curse, and I think the conditions of the curse are what keep the Weasleys in perpetual poverty. There are plenty of curses in Harry Potter that can span generations, like the Maledictus curse, for example, which is passed down the bloodline and afflicts the women. Nagini is a prime example of this. Astoria Malfoy, the witch who would become Draco's wife, also later dies of a blood curse. So we know that curses affecting an entire bloodline are possible. We also know that rather intricate, non-specific curses are possible, like the Defense Against the Dark Arts curse, which is said to afflict anyone who assumes the role of Professor for Defense Against the Dark Arts. There are a lot of intangibles for these sorts of curses, but they always seem to achieve their respective goals in a roundabout way. I think the same can be said for the Weasley curse. I think that no matter how successful the Weasleys may become in their professional endeavours, they are doomed to stay in relative poverty. By the end of the books, the Weasley family's combined income should have been considerable, but it seemed like year after year they were stuck facing the same sorts of financial adversities. I theorise that the curse works in one of a few ways. The first is that no matter how successful they are doomed to lose most of it due to mismanagement. Their curse is that they are horrible with money. And this may have caused the generations of Weasley family members to take ownership over this trait and chalk up their lack of wealth to their own shortcomings, rather than investigate further and discover a potential reason. I suspect that they may be entirely unaware that they are even afflicted by this curse. A prime example of this curse in effect was their trip to Egypt. For the first time in years, the family had some disposable income after winning the Daily Prophet's grand prize galleon draw. And what exactly did they do with their money? Did they spend it fixing their house? Did they buy new clothes for their kids? No, they spent it on a family-wide month-long summer holiday to visit their son Bill in Egypt. When they came back from the trip, they had enough galleons left over to buy Ron a new wand. But apart from Ron's wand, all of the money was spent on the trip. My next theory is that no matter how successful they may be, they are doomed and cursed to earn little more than what their expenses dictate. That is, no matter what they earn, their expenses will always rise to counter earnings, or vice versa. So now the big question, why are they cursed? Well, I suspect that it has something to do with their family being blood traitors. Within the wizarding world, there is a pureblood directory known as the Sacred 28, a list of the 28 remaining pureblood families in the wizarding world. The Weasleys happen to be on this list, but they also have a long-standing reputation for their tolerant views of muggles, half-bloods, and mudbloods, which frequently gave way to other members of the Sacred 28, referring to them as blood traitors. But just as they were scorned by those who valued blood purity, the Weasleys were outspoken about their resentment for being included in such a list as the pureblood directory. Weasleys were typically sorted into Gryffindor House while attending Hogwarts, and many members of the family supported the Order of the Phoenix. Given the rich history of the wizarding world, and the fact that the Weasleys have been around for many centuries, I suspect that somewhere along the way they caught the attention and focus of a group of dark witches or wizards, likely other members of the Sacred 28. Who exactly cursed them is anyone's guess, but wouldn't it make things super interesting if it turned out to be the Malfoys? I'll leave that one up to you guys to decide. Dementors, towering at 3 meters tall, are sinister, cloaked beings with dark grey, scabby skin. These malevolent creatures symbolize the embodiment of unhappiness and despair. They are commonly known as the guards of Azkaban prison, responsible for ensuring that all of the darkest witches and wizards inside do not escape. Dementors were originally created by J.K. Rowling as a way of representing depression, and so Rowling, having experienced depression herself, wanted to create a creature that personified all of the negative aspects. Dementors are among the foulest creatures that walk this earth. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. Even muggles feel their presence, though they can't see them. Get too near a Dementor, and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. But J.K. Rowling isn't the only creator of the Dementors. There has to be an in-universe answer as well. So, where did they come from? Now, when you look up this question, most places will point you towards a dark wizard named Acristis, a man that is considered by many to be the father of Dementors. But I'm here today to put a spin on that. Acristis isn't particularly well known, but but he certainly marked his place in wizarding history as he was a practitioner of the worst kinds of dark arts imaginable. Very little is known about him, other than the fact that he was alive during the 15th century, and that he was evil, pure evil. No one even knows his nationality, and if it was known, I'm sure no one would want to claim ownership of him. He was that bad. Extinction was the original inhabitant of the island fortress of Azkaban, what we now know as the prison that holds some of the darkest witches and wizards within its walls. While travelling in the 15th century, Extinction stumbled upon the island, which at the time had no infrastructure to speak of. When he first arrived, it was just a regular island, but it didn't take long for Extinction to corrupt the island and turn it into his own little dark arts experiment. Hoping to keep the location of the island, which was located in the North Sea, a secret, Extinction kicked things off by placing concealment charms on the island, meaning that no one would be able to intentionally find it. After placing the concealment charms on the island, Extinction began his dark arts experiments by luring Muggle sailors to the island, then torturing and eventually murdering them. It has been said that before ever stepping foot on the island, Extinction was mad, but that after spending some time there, he became totally insane, completely losing touch with reality. He became so wrapped up and enthralled in his experimentation with dark magic that he had lost his mind, and the poor sailors that he lured to the island witnessed it firsthand. In his madness, it has been speculated that Extinction either unwittingly or perhaps intentionally created what we now know to be Dementors. But beyond this speculation, there is absolutely no information on how Extinction created them. We also know that no one visited the island until Extinction died, the reason for this being that his concealment charms weren't lifted until his death. And so, when he died, the giant island, which Extinction had enlarged, simply appeared out of nowhere, which prompted the Ministry of Magic at the time to investigate. Those who entered to investigate refused afterwards to talk of what they had found inside, but the least frightening part of it was that the place was infested with Dementors. Many in authority thought Azkaban an evil place that was best destroyed. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The very walls of the building seemed steeped in misery and pain, and the Dementors were determined to cling to it. Experts who had studied buildings built with and around dark magic contended that Azkaban might wreak its own revenge upon anybody attempting to destroy it. The fortress was therefore left abandoned for many years, a home to continually breeding Dementors. The prevailing theory for why Extinction was the one to create Dementors is that he was found dead on an island full of them, but that doesn't reveal any aspects related to how he created them. Here's what I think. Extinction created one Dementor, and this one Dementor took it from there. We know that Extinction performed dark arts experiments deemed unimaginable. We also know that he lived on the island in secrecy for many years, occasionally luring sailors there via his concealment charms. I think the first sailor that he lured to the island became Patient Zero. I think this one sailor, for as long as Extinction remained on the island, became his go-to for any and all kinds of twisted dark arts experiments. I think one poor man must have been on the receiving end of it all, enduring years and years of torture from an incredibly sinister dark wizard. And I think that it was this man that eventually, in a roundabout way, birthed a Dementor. Let me explain. In the Harry Potter universe, witches and wizards subject to trauma at a young age can manifest what is called an obscurus, making them an obscurial. This obscurus is a dark and powerful force created as a result of a young witch or wizard suppressing their magical abilities. Basically, instead of learning to control and express their magic, they bottle it up, leading to the creation of an obscurus. Basically, the trauma and fear is significant enough to create a powerful, dark, parasitic force, and these obscurus are nothing to scoff at. They're incredibly powerful, very hard to contain, and entirely unpredictable. But my point is this: the whole obscurial process demonstrates to me that when the stresses are significant enough, magic can birth or create new dark magic. And I think that the original Dementor was birthed or created from a man whose soul was continually tormented for years and years. The sailor may not have been magical himself, but he was certainly subjected to his fair share of dark magic. So it's not all that surprising that it would have had some sort of magical outcome. The man tortured on Acristus Island would have been stripped of everything: his dignity, his hope, his sanity, and eventually his very soul. He would have experienced the entire range of negative emotions associated with being a human, making him the perfect breeding ground for a Dementor, which of course represents all of those things: hopelessness, despair, etc. The alternative to this theory is that the Dementor wasn't birthed from the man, but was instead created from the man's soul. After years of enduring Acristus' torturous experiments, the final nail in the coffin came when Acristus cast a spell that ripped his soul out of his body. Ever heard of Avada Kedavra? We know that the killing curse leaves its victims soulless, but what this suggests is that the soul still exists, just outside of the physical body. I happen to think that one poor sailor's tormented soul had endured so much that when it was ejected from the body, it manifested into a dark and powerful depressive force, a Dementor. The existence of a soul is a somewhat abstract concept, making it quite difficult to define. However, the generally accepted concept of a soul is that it's a kind of immaterial spiritual essence, an actuating cause of an individual's life. It's what makes us tick, and it certainly has no scientific explanation. It's the soul that Dementors feed on. It's pieces of soul that Voldemort imparts into objects, and it's the soul that Avada Kedavra, purportedly, rips out of the body. The soul is what keeps our corporeal form earthbound, and that's why it plays a significant role in the conversation surrounding the wizarding afterlife. You can exist without your soul, you know, as long as your brain and heart are still working, but you'll have no sense of self anymore, no memory, no anything. There's no chance at all of recovery. You'll just exist as an empty shell, and your soul is gone forever. Lost. Harry Potter very much perpetuates the idea that ultimately, the physical body is merely a shell, a vessel that merely transports the vital life force within. And because the soul is immaterial, it exists forever, just like Dementors. If we are to go by one of my theories, we can reasonably conclude that Dementors are either A. Parasitic dark forces created as a result of torture and other horrific conditions, or B. Actual tainted souls of individuals that have been subjected to copious amounts of dark magic. But whichever theory you subscribe to, I still think that Acristus was only responsible for creating one Dementor. The rest of them, well, that was up to the first one, Patient Zero. Let me explain. The Dementors possess a powerful ability known as the Kiss. This Kiss is capable of extracting the victim's soul from their very body, leaving them as just a shell of their former selves. Conventional understanding of the Kiss would suggest that once it's performed, the soul is extracted and pushed into a sort of void, nowhere to be found. But I think that once the soul is ejected from the body, it turns into the very creature that pulled it out in the first place, a Dementor. The physical shell of the victim remains as just a physical shell, but it's their soul that's transformed. Dementors are known for having a strong impact on their surrounding environment, mainly characterized by a chilling decrease in temperature, diminished light, enhanced darkness, and instilling despair and hopelessness in nearby living beings. Harry experiences this firsthand in the books. An intense cold swept over them all. Harry felt his own breath catch in his chest. The cold went deeper than his skin. It was inside his chest. It was inside his very heart. Harry's eyes rolled up into his head. He couldn't see. He was drowning in cold. There was a rushing in his ears as though of water. He was being dragged downward, the roaring growing louder. The Dementors, by virtue of being Dementors, create the perfect environment for breeding. And what better a creature to understand human despair than another human? Or at least what used to be another human. How else could we expect a dark creature to understand the full range of human emotions? The Ministry of Magic classifies Dementors as non-beings, also known as non-human spiritus apparition, a classification which refers to creatures formed out of human emotions. And this sounds like a perfect description to me. There's only one mention of Dementors breeding in the books, and it occurs during an exchange between Fudge and the Muggle Prime Minister in The Half-Blood Prince. Even the weather was dismal. All this chilly mist in the middle of July. It wasn't right. It wasn't normal. But, said the Prime Minister, with a sense of dawning horror, didn't you tell me they're the creatures that drain hope and happiness out of people? That's right, and they're breeding. That's what's causing all this mist. And if we are to believe that Dementors breeding creates mist, then their attack on Harry on the train would support the idea that breeding just means attacking people, or perhaps animals, and sucking out more souls. During his encounter with the Dementors on the train, Harry experiences the following. A thick white fog was swirling around him, inside him. When Muggleborn students are sent off to Hogwarts school, how do you think their parents explain their absence to the rest of the Muggle world? What do their parents tell the government? What do they tell their friends? To those with no knowledge of the wizarding world, what happens to their children? Today we're going to be exploring all of that and more as we discuss the Muggleborn students being sent to Hogwarts. First things first, I have to give credit where credit is due. This video was actually the most requested topic from my recent community tab post. There, a user by the name of David Kennedy 8929 asked the following. I still want to see a video on how the Muggle parents who sent their kids off to school spoke to their friends regarding the magical world. Hermione's parents come to mind. So, what is a Muggleborn, and why is this such an intriguing topic? Muggleborns are witches and wizards that come from non-magical families. They are effectively the first magical individuals in their lineage, and because of their sudden manifestation of magical abilities, they often surprise and confuse their Muggle relatives. Muggleborns face particular challenges within the wizarding society, as their lack of magical heritage can lead to skepticism and even hostility from some pure-blood individuals who believe that magical ability should only be reserved for those born into wizarding families. But regardless of how purebloods feel about them, Muggleborns are legitimate witches and wizards, and they have every right to all of the aspects of wizarding society, Hogwarts included. And one day, when the time is right, they end up getting their Hogwarts acceptance letter, just like everyone else. Traditionally, the Hogwarts acceptance letter informs new students of their acceptance to Hogwarts, and along with the letter includes a list of required textbooks and materials required for the upcoming school year. When a witch or wizard from a magical family receives this letter, things are fairly straightforward. They know the procedure, and when the time comes for them to go to school, they're brought to platform 9 3/4 and sent off. The procedure for Muggleborns, however, is a little bit different, as it often causes a lot of confusion. Hermione said the following. Nobody in my family is magic at all. It was ever such a surprise when I got my letter, but I was ever so pleased, of course. I mean, it's the very best school of witchcraft there is. Colin Creevy also weighed in on the process. It's amazing here, isn't it? I never knew all the odd stuff I could do was magic till I got the letter from Hogwarts. My dad's a milkman. He couldn't believe it either, so I'm taking loads of pictures to send home to him. In the case of Muggleborns, Hogwarts dispatches a member of staff to travel to the home of said Muggleborn student so that the letter can be properly introduced and explained. The books don't actually acknowledge which staff member is directly responsible for this. However, as McGonagall is in charge of the registrar, it makes most sense that it would be her responsibility. I can't even begin to imagine how difficult it would be to explain magic to a Muggle, a real monster of a task. However, if it's going to be anyone, I think that either Dumbledore or McGonagall would be most convincing. In the films, we see Dumbledore travelling to Will's orphanage to inform Tom Riddle of his acceptance to the school. Though he was magical, he had no parents that he knew of, so it's necessary for a member of staff to come and explain the process as well as the magical world. But I wonder, does part of this introduction to the world of magic include an explanation on what to tell their Muggle friends and family? One of the biggest and arguably most important wizarding laws is the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, a statute implemented in 1692 with the goal of hiding the existence of witches and wizards from Muggles. Wizarding society wasn't always so hidden, not systematically anyway. During the medieval period, wizards were persecuted brutally by Muggles, who were afraid of magic but not very good at recognizing it. This caused many wizards to operate in self-imposed secrecy. Extremist wizards wanted war against Muggles, but the wider community instead opted for secrecy, an international law enforced by each country's Ministry of Magic, which was responsible for concealing societies, controlling magical beasts, beings and spirits, and making sure wizards don't blow everyone's cover. This is one of the largest and most important wizarding laws, as it's directly responsible for the line separating Muggle from magical. Breaches of this wizarding law are taken particularly seriously, perhaps more seriously than anything else, and punishments can be severe. But surely this must put the parents of these magical children in a tough position. If they can't acknowledge the magical world's existence to outsiders, how are they supposed to rationalize their children's absence? To friends and family, I suppose you can make up some lie, like he's off at boarding school. But what about government bodies? In most places, parents are generally expected to report to the government that their children are attending school. The legal requirements vary depending on the jurisdiction, but many countries have compulsory education laws that require parents or guardians to ensure their children receive an education. These laws typically specify the age range for compulsory education and require parents to enroll their children in an accredited school or complying with alternative education options, such as homeschooling or private schooling. In the US, for example, all states have laws mandating school attendance, with specific age requirements that vary by state. Parents are generally responsible for ensuring their children attend school and may be required to provide proof of enrollment or attendance to the government or local educational authorities. If they can't disclose information about the wizarding world to their respective government, how can they possibly rationalize their child's absence? I've got a number of theories. Muggle connections. Despite the Muggle and Wizarding world's prominent division, it is worth noting that there are some key Muggle figures that do know about all that is magical. One such individual is the Muggle Prime Minister. Traditionally, the British Prime Minister is informed about the existence of the Wizarding world on the night of their appointment. Occasionally, they would have meetings with their Wizarding world counterpart, the Minister for Magic, to discuss matters that could affect both the Wizarding and Muggle worlds, such as notable events like the escape of Sirius Black, the mass breakout from Azkaban, and the return of Lord Voldemort. And if there were any incidents where magic and the Muggle world collided in a way that couldn't easily be explained, the Prime Minister would work with the British Ministry of Magic's Office of Misinformation to create a believable cover-up story. Given that the Muggle Prime Minister is an inside man with an incredible amount of power, it stands to reason that the Prime Minister is responsible for creating, upholding legislation that effectively covers up children attending a magic school. In his role, I imagine that the Prime Minister would reserve the right to sever any investigations into what exactly Hogwarts is, and on paper, it would just be some private school off in the Scottish Highlands. Alternatively, Muggleborn Hogwarts students may be just listed as homeschooled kids that receive their curriculum from a school without a physical location. Hogwarts would file the necessary paperwork to appear legitimate, but would really exist as a sham corporation by registering as a school entity and following protocols similar to Muggle private schools. This would then allow them to maintain a low profile while still complying with certain requirements, without the need to completely remove Muggleborn students from public databases or disrupt their access to healthcare. The next possibility is that the Ministry of Magic appoints a specific witch or wizard, or perhaps sub-department, Muggle Liaison Office, to be responsible for helping parents create a convincing facade surrounding their child's whereabouts. It would be the job of these insider wizards to work undercover in key Muggle positions and create a paper trail for Hogwarts so it looks like a regular boarding school. My last theory is that it's the responsibility of the Muggle Liaison Officer mentioned earlier to help facilitate the students' smooth transition into magical education. Given that it's their job to explain the Muggle world to the parents in the first place, it would make sense that they would take responsibility for smoothing everything over and ensuring that a seamless integration into magical society takes place. As for friends and family, things get a bit easier. This is because there's no government mandate stipulating that you must legally tell your friends and family what you've done with your child. In the case of Vernon Dursley, he simply told his sister Marge that Harry was attending a first-rate institution for hopeless cases. Well, it'll be hard work pretending to Aunt Marge I go to that St. Whatsits, St. Brutus's Secure Centre for Incurably Criminal Boys. Exactly, it's a lot to remember. I'll have to make it sound convincing, won't I? What if I accidentally let something slip? You'll get the stuffing knocked out of you, won't you? Rubeus Hagrid's first wand was rather bendy, 16 inches long, and made of oak. It has been expressed that those with oak wands usually have an affinity with the magic of the natural world, that a bendy wand signifies a high level of adaptability and personality, and that the significant length of his wand is representative of his large stature and enormous personality. You can tell a lot about a person from their wand. But if you met Hagrid as an adult, you'd just have to guess these things about him, because the Hagrid we know walks around with an umbrella. Of course, there's more to Hagrid's umbrella wand than meets the eye, but the fact remains that Hagrid does not carry a wand in the traditional sense, the main reason being that his wand was snapped while he was still just a boy. During his third year at Hogwarts, Hagrid was falsely accused by Tom Riddle to have released a monstrous creature on the school that killed a Muggleborn witch named Myrtle Warren, and as a result of this, his wand was destroyed by the British Ministry of Magic. But the actions taken towards Hagrid always seemed extreme and inconsistent. Because there was insufficient evidence to prosecute Hagrid, he avoided Azkaban, at least the first time around, but he still somehow landed himself an expulsion from Hogwarts and a snapped wand. Today we're going to be diving into the real reasons for Hagrid's unfair treatment. Hagrid's parentage was a pretty poorly kept secret. To most it seemed obvious that he was born from a mixed relationship between a giantess and a wizard. Still, Hagrid tried to keep the details a secret, at times, although he never quite fooled anyone. His mother was known as Fridwulfa, a 20-foot-tall giantess that was truly a force to be reckoned with. With a natural resistance to most spells and curses, it would have taken over half a dozen wizards to defeat Hagrid's mother in a fight. For that reason, the wizarding world feared giants like Fridwulfa most of all, which makes her marriage to Hagrid's father, Mr. Hagrid, all the stranger. Although giantesses and men had been known to wed each other, it wasn't a very common practice. As you could guess, wizards and witches frowned upon mixed marriages, and even the giants, who valued size and power above all else, looked down on their peers who married weak human wizards. But Fridwulfa and Mr. Hagrid actually gave their relationship an honest attempt, and they were happy for a while, that is, until December of 1928, when Fridwulfa and Mr. Hagrid welcomed their son Rubeus into the world. In giant culture, they prided themselves on having the largest, strongest babies, and after a quick glance at the infant Rubeus, Fridwulfa realized that she had failed. As a half-giant, Rubeus was a fraction of the size of other giant babies, and by the time Hagrid was 3 years old, it became glaringly apparent that Hagrid would never grow to the same size as other giants, which caused Fridwulfa's loyalty to falter. Ashamed by her child's small stature, Fridwulfa decided to run away, and fled back to her giant colony. In the years that followed, young Rubeus Hagrid lived a simple life with his father. The pair lived in the West Country of England, near the Forest of Dean, which is the cause for Hagrid's distinctive accent. Although Hagrid and his father had a strong relationship, Hagrid's social life suffered outside of the home. As a half-giant, other parents would often warn their children about playing with him. It wasn't until Hagrid received his acceptance letter to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry that the young boy thought he could finally find a close-knit group of friends. And before embarking on his journey to Hogwarts, young Hagrid, just like so many other students before him, made the trek to Diagon Alley, specifically Ollivander's, where he would receive his first wand. It seems strange that for as long as we've known Hagrid, he's held an umbrella in place of a wand. And while we now know that Hagrid's original wand is inside of this umbrella, the reality is that it was once a fully functioning magical item in its own right. And so, in 1940, Hagrid began his first semester at Hogwarts School, a process that Hagrid found quite bittersweet. While attending Hogwarts would provide the opportunity to meet other magical children and expand his magical horizons, it also meant that he would have to leave behind his beloved father. Hagrid also quickly realized that, in some aspects, Hogwarts wasn't all too different from the real world. At school, he continued to suffer, as his fellow students ridiculed and bullied him. If he were anyone else, he'd use his natural brawn to turn the tide against his bullies, but Hagrid's low self-esteem and non-violent disposition made him a natural target. This caused Hagrid to instead search for companionship through magical beasts and creatures, showcasing very early on his affinity for the natural world and the creatures within it. However, this hobby did land Hagrid in trouble on more than a few occasions. As a student, Hagrid raised werewolf cubs under his bed, trod off into the Forbidden Forest to wrestle trolls, and even acquired an acromantula that would heavily impact his future. By his third year at school, Hagrid had grown to nearly 11 feet in height, but unfortunately, he continued to struggle socially. To make matters worse, Hagrid's father, Mr. Hagrid, suddenly passed, and this wasn't even close to the end of Hagrid's streak of bad luck. Eventually, Tom Riddle, who was only a few years older than Hagrid at the time, decided to frame Hagrid for a recent murder at the school. Riddle was actually the one responsible for the crime, having opened the Chamber of Secrets and released the basilisk within. However, he was able to convince the Ministry of Magic that one of Hagrid's dangerous pets, an acromantula named Aragog, was the culprit. In the aftermath, Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts and forbidden by the Ministry from using a wand ever again. However, thanks to Albus Dumbledore's quick intervention, Hagrid was saved from going back into the real world as an orphan. Dumbledore managed to land Hagrid a role, studying how to become a groundskeeper. This gesture of kindness might have been enough to keep Hagrid from a life of crime. With his father gone, the young half-giant had nowhere to turn, and the fate of giants in the wizarding world was usually a bloody, painful one. Because Hagrid was expelled in his schoolboy days, he never finished his education. This meant that he would forever remain an unqualified wizard, and subsequently barred from performing magic. Okay, so Hagrid's wand was snapped, and he was expelled for a crime they couldn't even prove he committed. There are a number of issues with this besides the obvious. First of all, not even prisoners of Azkaban have their wands snapped. When a witch or wizard is found guilty of a crime punishable by imprisonment, their material items, including their wands, are taken from them. However, these items, wands included, are not destroyed. No one knows for certain where they are kept exactly, but what we do know is that they are kept somewhere, entirely intact. This is proven throughout the series by the fact that multiple witches and wizards who have served time at the wizarding prison of Azkaban, such as Igor Karkaroff and Lucius Malfoy, get their wands back when they re-enter magical society. We also know that these individuals continue to practice magic. Igor Karkaroff even goes on to become the headmaster of Durmstrang Institute, the wizarding school in Eastern Europe. Clearly, both of these wizards, who were known Death Eaters during Voldemort's first rise to power, served their time at Azkaban and then had their items returned to them, either by the Dementors at the prison or the Ministry. Some fans have even speculated that convicts' possessions, including their wands, are released to their next of kin, so perhaps those leaving Azkaban retrieved their belongings from family members upon their release. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban for performing the Cruciatus Curse on Alice and Frank Longbottom, managed to get her wand back after she escaped from the prison. This means that even if a convict is never meant to be released from Azkaban and is supposed to rot away in prison for the rest of their life, their wand is still not destroyed. But yet, a third-year student had his wand snapped in half and his magical future taken away from him for a crime he didn't even commit. Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts at the mere age of 13. His wand taken from him and destroyed. His future also taken from him and destroyed. And told that he could no longer practice magic, Hagrid was turned away from the majority of the wizarding community in disgrace before he even reached the age of 14. I suppose you could make the argument that the severity of Hagrid's expulsion was due to the fact that a young witch was killed as a result of the Chamber of Secrets being reopened. But that doesn't actually make all that much sense when you consider that not even convicted criminals who actually torture and murder people with their own hands lose their wands when they're sent to Azkaban. The other issue here is that there are no other expulsions on record where the wand is snapped, and it just so happens that another major Harry Potter character was accused of very similar crimes but faced a vastly different outcome. This character, of course, was Newt Scamander, who faced expulsion at the age of 16. In The Case of Beasts, Explore the Film Wizardry of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, there is an article directly addressing the details and outcomes of Newt's crimes. Notes: proposed expulsion from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry due to the illegal possession of a magical beast, causing endangerment of human life and violation of animal welfare laws. Magical beast, Jarvie, level 3. Punishment: expulsion from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Dumbledore may have stepped in to defend Newt, and this expulsion may not have been enforced to the same extent, but the fact remains that Hagrid faced vastly different consequences for essentially the same crime. And why is that? Unfortunately, I think that it's because he's a half-giant. And giants, if you didn't know, are some of the most hated creatures in the wizarding world. Extend them the hand of friendship now, before it is too late, or Voldemort will persuade them, as he did before, that he alone among wizards will give them their rights and their freedom. You cannot be serious. If the magical community got wind that I had approached the giants, people hate them, Dumbledore. End of my career. Prejudice among wizardkind towards giants and many other non-human species is a well-documented issue in the wizarding world. Giants have often been portrayed as aggressive and dangerous creatures in wizarding literature and folklore, perpetuating stereotypes that have led to fear and discrimination. The bias against giants can be traced back to historical conflicts between giants and wizards, as well as the portrayal of giants as enemies in stories and legends. This negative depiction has perpetuated prejudice and fear of giants among wizardkind. Therefore, when Hagrid was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets during his time at Hogwarts, the bias against giants likely influenced the severity of the punishment he received. Despite the lack of concrete evidence against him, Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts and had his wand snapped, a punishment that was incredibly harsh and disproportionate considering the circumstances. This treatment reflects the deep-rooted prejudice and discrimination that exists in the wizarding world, particularly towards magical beings with non-human heritage. Adding insult to injury, I think that another reason Hagrid was treated so poorly was because the Ministry feared him. Being a giant comes with several physical advantages that make them one of the most powerful creatures in the wizarding world. Firstly, giants are incredibly large and physically imposing, with immense raw strength that is proportionate to their size. Their size gives them natural physical advantages over smaller creatures, allowing them to overpower them with ease. This raw power can make them difficult to detain or control, even for multiple wizards working together. Secondly, giants are highly durable and resistant to damage. Their large size and tough skin make them much harder to injure than other creatures. Spells that would incapacitate or harm normal creatures may have limited effects on giants, making them formidable opponents in battle or other confrontations. Finally, giants have heightened senses. Their hearing and sense of smell are stronger than that of normal humans, making them more aware of their surroundings and better able to detect danger or prey. And if you add those obvious physical advantages with the ability to cast spells, well, then you've got yourself a pretty powerful individual. This was of course the case with Hagrid. We see this in the books when Hagrid takes on a group of trained Aurors without a wand and wins. Hagrid took 2 massive swipes at his closest attackers. Judging by their immediate collapse, they'd been knocked cold. Harry saw him double over and thought for a moment that he had finally been overcome by a spell, but on the contrary, next moment Hagrid was standing again with what appeared to be a sack on his back. Then Harry realized that Fang's limp body was draped around his shoulders. Get him, screamed Umbridge, but her remaining helper seemed highly reluctant to go within reach of Hagrid's fists. Indeed, he was backing away so fast he tripped over one of his unconscious colleagues and fell over. Hagrid had turned and begun to run, with Fang still hung around his neck. Umbridge sent one last stunning spell after him, but it missed, and Hagrid, running full pelt toward the distant gates, disappeared into the darkness. Can you imagine if Hagrid had been wielding a wand and was backed by a fully fledged magical education? In short, Hagrid's wand was snapped not because he was being legitimately punished for crimes that he had likely committed, but instead due to inherent prejudice towards giants and fear of how powerful Hagrid could become with a magical education. But now you might be wondering, did Hagrid ever finish his magical education? In the Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid is finally exonerated for his alleged involvement in the opening of the chamber. His name is cleared when it is revealed that the true culprit behind the attacks and the opening of the chamber was Tom Riddle. With the help of Harry Potter and his friends, the truth about Hagrid's innocence comes to light, and he is vindicated. Because Hagrid was expelled in his schoolboy days, he never finished his education. This meant that he was an unqualified wizard, and subsequently wasn't allowed to perform magic. However, given that his name was eventually cleared, it should make sense that his ability to perform magic would be reinstated. J.K. Rowling was actually asked this exact question in an interview. Since Hagrid's name was cleared in Book 2, will he ever be allowed to do magic openly again? He is allowed. He's been allowed to do magic openly ever since he became a teacher, but because he was never fully trained, his magic is never going to be what it should be. He is always going to be a bit inept. And so Hagrid, after waiting a whopping 50 years, finally got to perform magic openly again. But I think it's safe to say that as far as the series is concerned, and the actions of the Ministry of Magic, Hagrid got it worse than pretty much anyone, all because the wizarding world is so damn intolerant. Have you ever wondered why the witches and wizards of New are so weak? The Hogwarts founders from the 10th century were supposed to have been 4 of the most skilled witches and wizards that the magical world had ever seen, with proof of this being the impressive magical institution they left behind. Then of course there's Merlin, another 10th century wizard that is supposed to have been the most powerful wizard of all time, and was aptly named the Prince of Enchanters. And a few centuries after that came the Peveril brothers, a trio of brothers who, in Dumbledore's own words, were gifted, dangerous wizards who succeeded in creating those powerful objects. Those objects, of course, being the fabled Deathly Hallows. And in the 14th century, along came Nicolas Flamel, who made wizarding history by creating perhaps the most powerful magical object of all time, the Philosopher's Stone. When people talk about witches and wizards of the past, it's as though they were so powerful that they are entirely uncomparable to most modern-day witches and wizards. In the modern era, we've got powerful wizards like Voldemort and Dumbledore, but they sort of seem like exceptions to the rule. It doesn't seem like they're true outliers, but instead that they more or less represent the level of power that wizards should have, or perhaps once had. So my question is, what happened? Why are witches and wizards so much weaker than they were in centuries prior? Is it all the butterbeer? Today we're going to be exploring all of that and more as we peel back the layers of wizarding history and uncover where all of that raw power went. I believe that the key to understanding the depreciating levels of power among Wizardkind directly correlates to a dark secret in wizarding history. Hear me out. In the current era, there exists a definitive line separating Muggle from magical, and it probably won't surprise you to hear that this current landscape came as a direct result of conflict between the two worlds. But what you may not know is that for centuries, witches and wizards lived among Muggles, and would even use their abilities to help their non-magical friends and neighbours in need. Presumably, much of the magic that was performed during this time was done for medicinal needs, to help cure illness, prevent outbreaks of disease, or heal injuries. And while I'm sure dark magic existed and was wielded by some witches and wizards against Muggles, for the most part there was no ill will between the two communities. But then, in the late 1700s, witches and wizards went into hiding. Why? Because for the past couple of centuries, Muggles had begun to hunt down those with magical abilities, accusing them of worshipping the devil and participating in sinful activities, before ultimately putting them on trial and condemning many of them to death. The first witch hunts began in the early 1300s throughout various European communities, before spreading rampantly across the globe and culminating in the American town of Salem in the 1690s. Over the course of 400 years or so, it's estimated that about 110,000 people were tried for witchcraft, with somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people convicted and then executed for these crimes. Dumbledore's notes in his copy of Wizard and Hopping Pot references the environment at the time. The persecution of witches and wizards was gathering pace all over Europe in the early 15th century. Many in the magical community felt, and with good reason, that offering to cast a spell on the Muggle next door's sickly pig was tantamount to volunteering to fetch the firewood for one's own funeral pyre. "Let the Muggles manage without us," was the cry, as the wizards drew further and further apart from their non-magical brethren. In response to the increasingly hostile environment, significant portions of the wizarding populace were forced to start living double lives, using concealment charms to protect themselves. And eventually, in an effort to preserve their magical existence, they began to establish hidden communities within Muggle villages. As the witch hunts grew ever fiercer, wizarding families began to live double lives, using charms of concealment to protect themselves and their families. By the 17th century, any witch or wizard who chose to fraternize with Muggles became suspect, even an outcast in his or her own community. And we're led to believe that this is what catalyzed the creation of the International Statute of Secrecy, a protective measure that has enabled wizarding society to remain in relative peace for centuries. This law, first signed in 1689 and officially ratified in 1692, was created to conceal the existence of witches and wizards from the Muggle population. It was designed to safeguard the magical world through the implementation of strict secrecy measures, preventing Muggles from discovering the existence of the wizarding community and their magical abilities. But I'm not so sure that the history books are telling the full story. I think that there's a lot more to this divide between the two worlds than we are led to believe. While the history books paint a picture of Wizardkind being the bigger person after years of conflict and subsequently disappearing into the shadows, I'm not so sure they had much of a choice in the matter. I don't truly believe that wizards just up and left voluntarily. By the late 17th century, Muggle and wizard conflicts had hit an all-time high, with plenty of bloodshed and casualties on both sides. And it's these escalating tensions and violence that created a precarious and volatile environment, with both communities vying for power and control. The brutal clashes and devastating consequences of these conflicts had pushed the magical community to the brink, leading to a deep-seated fear of persecution and annihilation at the hands of the Muggles. This is when witches and wizards started going into hiding and living double lives. However, the unchecked power and advancements of the Muggles had become a formidable threat to the magical world, and the wizards found themselves in a disadvantaged position, fighting to preserve their way of life and protect their kind. And I suspect that the overwhelming influence and resources of the Muggles may have eventually left the magical community without any more options. At this stage, Wizardkind had lost their most powerful defenders at the hands of Muggle forces, which would explain why there's such an absence of powerful figures in the modern era. The more powerful and talented bloodlines were simply killed off. And I think that eventually, in the war between Muggles and Wizards, Muggles actually won. It's not that the Wizards wanted to go into hiding, they were forced there, and I suspect that the International Statute of Secrecy was never a voluntary choice made by Wizards, but in actuality a measure forced upon them by the dominant power of the non-magical world. And it certainly wouldn't have been the only Muggle-made decision that was implemented. Prior to 1707, the Wizards' Council was the longest-serving body to govern the magical community in Britain, but after the imposition of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692, the wizarding community suddenly decided that they needed a more highly structured, organized, and more complex governing structure than they had hitherto used, to support, regulate, and communicate with a community in hiding. This is when the Ministry of Magic was formed, and it all sort of sounds like something that the Muggles would have orchestrated in order to A. further establish control, B. ensure that wizards stay out of the Muggle world under the guise of keeping wizards safe, and C. suppress magical power. Wizards Council sounds like the name of a self-contained magical government, but Ministry of Magic sort of just sounds like a sub-department of something larger, like, I don't know, the Muggle government. There are also some clues in the book which could suggest that the Ministry actually answers to the Muggle government. In the fourth book, it's revealed that the Minister of Magic was required to tell the Prime Minister that he was bringing a dangerous magical creature into the country, a dragon. But this level of correspondence seems unusual and oddly accommodating for a magical government that was literally forced into hiding in order to stay alive. I can't imagine why they would have these sorts of self-imposed rules, unless that rule was put in place by the Muggles. The whole goal of the Ministry of Magic, besides introducing some level of law and order, is ensuring that the International Statute of Secrecy is maintained. But I don't think that we're looking at it from the right perspective. We are led to believe that they are upholding the International Statute of Secrecy to stay hidden from Muggles and protect Wizardkind. The whole Ministry of Magic is based around this. But I think that the Ministry is actually a Muggle-made and controlled department with a few primary goals: keep wizards away from Muggles and keep them hidden away in the shadows. In essence, these two perspectives share the same goal, but the main differentiator here is how wizards perceive themselves. In one scenario, wizards are looking out for themselves and doing what they believe is best for their species. But in the other, Wizardkind is a subjugated group that lost a war and is now being manipulated into hiding itself. The entire government is actually a clever plan to make wizards believe they are doing this to themselves. And after centuries of living under this bureaucracy, its policies have become part of the very culture of magic. The subtle manipulation and control exerted through the government, education system, and legal frameworks have served to perpetuate a sense of self-regulation and compliance among Wizardkind. By fostering the illusion of agency and autonomy within the magical community, the governing bodies have effectively maintained their dominance and influence over the fate of wizards and witches. The seamless integration of these structures into the fabric of magical society has obscured the true extent of external influence and manipulation exerted by the Muggles. As generations have passed under the guise of self-governance, the mechanisms of control have become so deeply entrenched that many within the magical community may not even question the underlying motives and power dynamics at play. The normalization of subjugation and compliance has perpetuated a cycle of obedience and conformity, further cementing the hegemonic control of the Muggle authorities over the magical world. As for the noticeable lack of powerful wizarding figures in the modern era, well, I think this governmental structure partially helps to answer that as well. While the most powerful bloodlines may have been lost protecting their kind during the peak of the war, I suspect that subsequent subjugation from the prevailing Muggles has made sure that no witches and wizards achieve that level of power again. By controlling the government, educational system, laws, etc., I suspect that they would be able to suppress the magical community's power quite effectively. It's hard to believe that the two worlds could ever truly separate, especially if we consider how intertwined they once were, and this could possibly be an answer as to how true separation was finally achieved. On the surface, Azkaban seems like a pretty good idea, mainly due to its effectiveness. It's on a far-off remote island, it has a fortress designed to keep the most dangerous criminals at bay, there are perpetual storms surrounding the island, and there's an army of Dementors working as prison guards. And that's just the physical side of things. Mentally, the prison is an absolute nightmare. The crashing waves and howling winds serve as a natural barrier, isolating the inmate from the world they once terrorized. The Dementors, with their shadowy forms, siphon hope and happiness from every soul they encounter, and those who enter Azkaban often leave something behind. Pieces of their sanity, their will to fight, and sometimes even their humanity. And all of this is just about borderline acceptable if we consider that it's meant to house murderers, dark wizards, and those who have committed unspeakable acts against others. But the major issue here is that Azkaban is one of the only wizarding prisons in Britain, and what this means is that perpetrators of more minor crimes, and in some cases those who have been wrongly convicted, are unjustly sent into this hellhole along with the rest of them. It hardly seems appropriate that someone convicted for, say, theft would endure what is essentially the same punishment as someone who was murdered. This raises a whole plethora of questions about wizarding society as a whole, but the one we're going to start with is, why one gigantic, horrible prison? Why not a network of smaller, more humane facilities that focus on rehabilitation rather than sheer punishment? Today we're going to be diving into all of that and more as we discuss the mess that is the wizarding justice system. What many of you probably didn't know is that when Azkaban was initially discovered by the Ministry of Magic, they decided to leave the island alone. The island, which had one time been the subject of the Dark Wizard Acrisdus's dark arts experiments, was revealed after he died and his concealment charms on the island lifted. Left behind was the fortress, Dementors, and apparently a lot of other stuff as well. In fact, initial surveyors of the island remarked that the least frightening part of it was that it was infested with Dementors, and so the general sentiment was that Azkaban should be left alone entirely. Many in authority thought Azkaban an evil place that was best destroyed. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The very walls of the building seemed steeped in misery and pain, and the Dementors were determined to cling to it. Experts who had studied buildings built with and around dark magic contended that Azkaban might wreak its own revenge upon anybody attempting to destroy it. The fortress was therefore left abandoned for many years, a home to continually breeding Dementors. However, all of that would change in 1718, when Damocles Rowell was elected as the second ever Minister for Magic. Rowell took over from Ulick Gamp, who had been against the use of Azkaban. But Rowell saw the terrifying island as an opportunity. It occurred to Rowell that the system for imprisoning witches and wizards at that time was no longer going to work, primarily due to concerns surrounding security. The International Statute of Secrecy had been recently introduced, and protecting the secrecy of Wizardkind became of utmost importance. And before Azkaban became the spot for imprisoning witches and wizards, there were actually many different locations that someone who broke wizarding law could be locked up. The Ministry of Magic felt that the small wizarding prisons that existed up and down the country in various towns and villages posed a security risk, because attempts by incarcerated witches and wizards to break out often led to undesirable bangs, smells, and light shows. A purpose-built prison, located on some remote Hebridean island, was preferred, and plans had been drawn up when Damocles Rowell became Minister for Magic. The International Statute of Secrecy was introduced in 1692, and Rowell didn't take over until 1718. This meant that for over 2 decades prior to Rowell taking over, the wizarding prison issue had been on their radar. However, Rowell didn't agree with the existing plans to create a new, purpose-built prison. Instead, he pushed and pushed to utilize the existing infrastructure at Azkaban. Sadistic by nature, Rowell scrapped the plans for the new prison at once and insisted on using Azkaban. He claimed that the Dementors living there were an advantage. They could be harnessed as guards, saving the ministry time, trouble, and expense. In spite of opposition from many wizards, among them experts on both Dementors and buildings with Azkaban's kind of dark history, Rowell carried out his plan, and soon a steady trickle of prisoners had been placed there. None ever emerged. If they were not mad and dangerous before being placed in Azkaban, they swiftly became so. Rowell continued in his role for a number of years before being ousted, and was eventually succeeded by the third ever Minister for Magic, Perseus Parkinson. But unfortunately, Parkinson was similarly pro-Azkaban. Thus, the prison remained in use. Rowell was succeeded by Perseus Parkinson, who was likewise pro-Azkaban. By the time that Eldritch Diggory took over as Minister for Magic, the prison had been operating for 15 years. There had been no breakouts and no breaches of security. The new prison seemed to be working well. It was only when Diggory went to visit that he realized exactly what conditions inside were like. Prisoners were mostly insane, and a graveyard had been established to accommodate those that died of despair. By the time Eldritch Diggory, the only minister who may have actually opposed the use of Azkaban, took over, it was too late, as Azkaban had proven itself a competent holding facility. By this time, the prison had successfully operated for 15 years. There were fewer wizarding breakouts, in fact there were none, and the Dementors of Azkaban were accounted for. And to many, including multiple iterations of the wizarding government, this was enough to keep using the prison. However, the biggest oversight was that witches and wizards were being sent to an environment akin to the depths of hell for seemingly all manners of crimes, and nobody seemed to care so long as the streets were rid of criminals, and the Dementors were kept busy. Which raises unsettling questions like, at what cost do we keep society safe, and how do we reconcile justice with the very real human suffering that comes from such a place? The psychological toll on prisoners in Azkaban, particularly those wrongfully convicted, raises some pretty serious ethical considerations. Think about it. Due to the large numbers of Dementors in the fortress, inmates are subjected to a relentless drain of hope and happiness, forced to relive their worst memories and feelings of despair. Get too near a Dementor and every good feeling, every happy memory will be sucked out of you. If it can, the Dementor will feed on you long enough to reduce you to something like itself, soulless and evil. You'll be left with nothing but the worst experiences of your life. And all of this occurs while they're trapped within the dark, cold walls of Azkaban, deprived of any human contact or sensory stimulation. And for those wrongfully convicted, the psychological effects are likely even more devastating. Innocent individuals endure the same horrors as the guilty, but with the addition of feelings of betrayal and despair. The extreme conditions of Azkaban not only punish the body, but also devastate the mind, raising serious questions about the use of such a facility in the name of so-called justice. But the Ministry of Magic aren't stupid, at least not all of them anyway. They know that all of this is happening, they just turn a blind eye. And why is that? Because of fear, of course. People do stupid, irrational, and even dangerous things out of fear. Case in point, Cornelius Fudge denying the resurgence of Voldemort despite indisputable evidence. By denying Voldemort's resurgence, Cornelius Fudge not only failed to acknowledge a grave threat, but also placed the entire wizarding world in a highly compromised and unprepared position. But where, in the case of Azkaban, does all of the fear come from? Why, the Dementors, of course. Unkillable dark spirits that seem to thrive, and more importantly stay put, in the conditions that the Ministry had created for them. Others were afraid of what might happen to the Dementors infesting the building if they deprived them of their home. The creatures were already strong and impossible to kill. Many feared a horrible revenge if they took away a habitat where they appeared to thrive. The use of Azkaban may not have been perpetuated by further ministers out of a desire to maintain an effective prison, but instead out of a fear of what would happen to the Dementors if sending prisoners to Azkaban halted. From the time they sent the first prisoner there, they set a precedent, and if the Ministry were to suddenly take away all of these souls, perhaps the Dementors would depart their island and come straight for the wizarding mainland. They had unwittingly created a food supply. And so, driven by fear, the Ministry established a policy of continually admitting prisoners as sacrificial lambs to appease the dark guardians of their prison, an arrangement reminiscent of sacrifices made to malevolent deities. From the moment you committed any sort of wizarding crime, you would become one of these sacrifices, with no regard for your humanity or possibility of redemption. Ultimately, the Ministry created a prison system that underscores moral integrity in favor of control and public safety, leaving lasting scars on both the wrongfully imprisoned and the society that condones such practices. Many of the early ministers for magic were completely fine with turning a blind eye and maintaining this arrangement. However, when Eldritch Diggory took over from Perseus Parkinson, he was the first to question the use of Dementors as prison guards. Back in London, Diggory established a committee to explore alternatives to Azkaban, or at least to remove the Dementors as guards. Experts explained to him that the only reason the Dementors were mostly confined to the island was that they were being provided with a constant supply of souls on which to feed. If deprived of prisoners, they were likely to abandon the prison and head for the mainland. This advice notwithstanding, Diggory had been so horrified by what he had seen inside Azkaban that he pressed the committee to find alternatives. Before they could reach any decision, however, Diggory caught dragonpox and died. Diggory tried his best during his years as minister to find a replacement for the Dementors that inhabited Azkaban, but due to his untimely death at the hands of dragonpox, this plan never came to fruition. And after Diggory, no Minister for Magic questioned the activities of Azkaban for 265 years, with minister after minister choosing to turn a blind eye to the inhumane conditions inside of the fortress. As awful as the fortress was, it was effective as a prison, and its existence meant that the terrifying Dementors inhabiting the island were accounted for. And so, for nearly 3 centuries, the only option for incarceration was to send people to what is effectively hell to get mercilessly tortured, an arrangement eerily similar to some sort of offering to a dark god. It wasn't until Kingsley Shacklebolt took over in 1998 that things were revisited, with Shacklebolt eventually purging the prison of Dementors. And that's it for today's video, which, besides the one coming in a few days, will close out 2024. See you all in 2025. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.